that endurance. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to start? What I want to do is a little bit of a quiz as we go. I am happy to stop and talk about some of the topics as we go. Today, I don't know why, I've been feeling a bit flat today. I'm like not in the mood to do this, I will admit. So you guys have to get me like all zooped up. Yeah, me and Kate. It's like, yeah, it's because I've been away, I don't know. But the funny thing is, this is the class I look forward to because this is the class with like the coolest cases. Like, I don't know, like, you know, you do torts and crim and they have like lots of like really salacious cases. Like contract law doesn't really give you that. But for some reason, I just think most of the cases we do today are kind of funny and I like them. So yeah, we'll get into it. So let's talk about, can you guys get yourselves onto some device, connect yourselves to the internet? Those of you who are at home, I'll find a way to reproduce this quiz for you, although I've been doing a bit of that and none of you have actually been doing them, so you make me feel sad. So, ready to go? I can't tell whether you're in or not. I was doing the slides, but it kept crashing when I was practicing. Yeah, I practice, believe it or not. So, all right. Which of the following communications can form express terms of a contract? There might be more than one answer. With this software, you can only choose one answer. I can pause it if we need to. A sign, email, telephone, informal document, oral statement. Which one or more of those could form an express term of a contract? All right, those of you who could get in have had, otherwise it's too late. And absolutely all of them can. I thought that was a nice way to start. There was no way to be wrong. Interestingly, most people were focused on email correspondence. I didn't put SMSs in there, did I? That might have been useful. Just saying. Questions, concerns, frustrations, thoughts? Oh, look, lots of people have decided just to provide their one letter now. Ben Kai, like I can see what's happening here. What is the rule taken from Lestrange and Graucob? There might be more than one correct answer. Apologies, I can't in this particular software use AGLC 4. A party will be bound by a written agreement, any written agreement. Signature does not affect whether or not a party is bound by an agreement. A contract must be signed and/or a party will be bound by the terms of an agreement if they have signed it. More participants this time, that's good to see. Okay, most of you are absolutely correct. So signature does, for those of you who picked the other answer, signature does affect whether or not a party is bound by an agreement. Signature is not, we don't have a high bar for signature. We don't need to authenticate signatures. We clearly don't need any more for them to be wet signatures, which tends to be the jargon that we use, as in somebody putting a pen to paper. Although it remains surprising to me how many organisations insist on some sort of formal signature. But in part, that makes sense because of the way that the rule in Lestrange and Graucob works. And it's effectively saying, if it looks like a contract and you've signed it, it doesn't matter that you haven't read it. The fact that you've signed it demonstrates that you had the opportunity to read it, and absent some sort of fraud or misrepresentation about what the terms were, it looked like a contract. The act of signing it demonstrates an intention to be bound.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can, while we look at who the leaders are.
So if a contract isn't necessarily wet signed, what are other forms terms of what else can constitute a signature?
So what other kinds of things could constitute a signature other than putting pen to paper?
Tick the box and I accept.
Tick the box and I accept is close. It's probably not treated as a signature as such. It wouldn't actually work for a deed, but that would be an indication of intention, absolutely. We have electronic signatures, so you can actually use an electronic signature process. I have seen a document where you've actually, like, I can sign on my PDF application and do that. Some of you were lucky or unlucky enough to get feedback from me in handwritten form, because I wasn't able to be online all of the time while I was marking papers. So I downloaded some and I had to write on them in PDF form. That kind of writing on a document. These days you can draw directly into Word or otherwise. Where the low bar from signature comes is that when these rules were being developed, the rates of literacy were quite low. So for those of you who are legal information or bureaucracy geeks, fingerprinting. The whole idea of fingerprinting, or understanding that fingerprinting was a technology that could be used to identify humans, actually was discovered in India. India inherited, for good or evil, mostly evil, lots of bureaucracy from being a colony of the British, or member of the British Empire. And so they had lots of forms that needed to be filled out and things that needed to be done in order to do anything. Most of the way that the Brits tended to colonise places was that they would make all of the laws in English and then often make it illegal to use any other language. So people who were speaking Hindi or Parsi or whatever it was often actually couldn't work in that environment very well, and certainly couldn't sign their names. So somebody noticed that everybody's fingerprint was different. So initially fingerprints were used as a form of signature. A little bit of trivia, it won't be on the exam, but I thought it was interesting.
Has policy changed there?
Policy changed, well, it's a Commonwealth country still, but it's an independent country now. So I think that technically it has 2 languages. English is still one of the official languages. I think English and Hindi, but it could be more. Somebody will have Wikipedia, I don't know.
Now the UAE where it worked had to have English, Arabic and then English.
Yeah.
Arabic would always prevail.
Because Arabic is the official language.
Yes,
See, the French did it completely the opposite way. They would colonise places and they would actually make it illegal to speak French, so they would keep that to themselves and they would have all their published laws in local languages. So it's an approach. Both have pluses and minuses, but here's not the place to talk about them with. Don't know why that's capitalised. In which situations will the rule in Lestrange and Graucob not apply? Again, there might be more than one correct answer. Where a party hasn't read the contract, where a document is not a contractual document, if the party consenting to the contract has been misled about the terms of the contract, where the document is where the document is a contractual document, as opposed to not a contractual document, which is up ahead. 2, 1. Somebody snuck in there at the last minute. Come on. Most of us are on the right track here. So if there has been somebody who's been misled, I think actually technically where the document isn't a contractual document, it's also correct to say that the rule in Lestrange and Graucob can't apply because it has no actual application, because if it's not a contract, whether or not you've signed it doesn't actually make any difference at all. But I think the better answer there is where we've got some sort of fraud or misrepresentation. A little bit of movement. Baltic Shipping Company, Chief Justice Gleeson and Justice Kirby held that adequate notice of a company's unusual terms were not, that should say given. Why? Again, there might be more than one correct answer. You can only select one. The plaintiff didn't receive notice of the unusual terms until the ticket was issued. The booking form contained all the relevant conditions. At the time the ticket was issued, the contract had already been entered into. There was not sufficient notice of any conditions. Both of those two are in fact correct. So when we're talking about unusual conditions, Baltic shipping, Oceanic is another case. Well, I think I'll talk about Oceanic today, not so much Baltic shipping, but it's the unusual tickets that are of unusual terms that are unexpected. Interphoto is another one. So the rule in Lestrange and Graucob has general application, but if you mislead someone or if you stick something in there that they absolutely wouldn't expect, effectively that bit that they wouldn't expect needs to have bells on it. So think about it, those of you who have looked at internet terms and conditions, often they come from American companies, and you'll see that if there is a disclaimer or a limiting term of something that says, we won't pay you any damages, we're not responsible if our software infects your machine with viruses or brings down the World Bank or anything like that. Often that stuff will be in bold and capital letters. Interestingly, there's a lot of science that says that makes it harder to read, but there are actually laws in the States that require onerous and unusual terms to be in bold and capital letters so that they're brought to people's attention, even though ultimately they're harder to read. Whoa, E's been pipped at the post. What is a Clickwrap contract? Again, there might be more than one. A one-page contract, simple one. An oral contract, a contract made online where the seller provides terms to the buyer. A contract made online where the buyer clicks on a dialog box to confirm they agree with the seller's terms and conditions stated prior to continuing with this agreement, or something that I would never read. Interesting, I thought everybody would go for the last one because you could be quick, you could get the points. You didn't even have to read it very much. I thought that was to balance things up. So a Clickwrap contract is its jargon term, but effectively the definition here, it's taken pretty much straight from your textbook, covers what we would call a Clickwrap contract. So the term Clickwrap, it's interesting. They used to be called shrink-wrap contracts, or it's derived from this idea of a shrink-wrap contract. So when you first, 15, 20 years ago, buying software, you would buy software, it would come in a box. And so inside the box would be the floppy disks, or more after that, they were still called floppy disks, but they were the 5.5-inch ones, and they were actually hard, or then a CD and subsequently a DVD. They'd be sitting in a box with a manual, and that would be shrink wrapped. So it'd have that plastic over it that you have to break. And there would be a notice on the outside of the box that basically says, here are the terms and conditions for this software. By opening the box, by removing the shrink wrap, you are accepting these terms. So there was actual act of acceptance. So then, of course, lots of things are now sold on the internet. There's no physical act. So instead, that idea of a separate box, there's a separate thing that you have to do to demonstrate acceptance. Whether or not you actually follow the link and read the terms really depends on the human involved. Little bit of movement. A term can be incorporated into a contract by a course of dealings. What factor or factors will the court consider in determining, sorry, I've got grammar problems today, in determining if the term has been incorporated into the contract by a course of dealings? Once again, there might be more than one option here. The regularity of the dealing, the uniformity of the dealing, the inconsistency of the dealing, or how clearly understood the dealing is. Everybody got one of those right. I think I'm going to enjoy today because we're going to be able to like fly. Everybody seems to be on the same page today. It's great. Oh, no movement there. Okay, what's the parole evidence rule? Have a think. Couple of options here. A rule which prevents intrinsic evidence being given to add or alter the terms of a contract. A rule which prevents the use of exclusion clauses. A rule that allows the use of all extrinsic evidence to interpret the terms of a written contract. Or a rule which limits the evidence that can be used to construe the terms of a written contract. Unfortunately, with this software, I've just given you 25 seconds for every single one of them. Sometimes we need longer. So basically, there are two sides to the rule. So both the first and the last one here are correct. In fact, it's the exact opposite of the middle two. So a rule that allows the rule actually prevents the use of extrinsic evidence in many circumstances. So if we have a written agreement, effectively something that appears on its face to be in entirety in writing will trump other evidence, and we can't even bring that other evidence other than in the exceptions, which we talked a little bit about in the tute last night, actually, which I managed to get up the recording very early this morning, so that's available to you. Okay, not much in it. What evidence does the parole evidence rule allow to be used to identify and interpret the terms of a written contract? As always, there might be more than one answer. Oral statements made during negotiation, the terms of the contract, letters, emails and/or SMS, earlier drafts of a contract. So read the question carefully. Split here. So basically, extrinsic evidence is excluded. When we have the parole evidence rule, extrinsic evidence is excluded. So the only time that we can bring in that extrinsic evidence is if there is an exception. So if we've got a written agreement that sets out and appears on its face to be the entire agreement, then the terms will be contained in that agreement because it's an entire agreement. So evidence of the terms can be brought in, but unless an exception applies, everything else that's extraneous can't. So part of our issue when we're trying to work out what the terms of a contract are, what the express terms are, is we actually need to work out whether the entire agreement was intended to be in writing or not. So good. This is where it's helpful to me. I don't like it when you get them all right, by the way. So you're making me feel better. Little bit of movement. In which of the following situations does the parole evidence rule have no application? Restitution, collateral contracts, express terms, total failure of consideration. Once again, more than one might apply. Okay, so if we have restitution, which is something we haven't spoken about very much, it actually gets covered subsequently, but because it's mentioned a couple of times in the chapter that deals with parole evidence rule, I thought I would include it. Or if we have a collateral contract, they are circumstances that fall within the exceptions. So effectively, restitution arises when there's been some kind of unjust enrichment. So if there has been something that has been said or done to induce somebody to enter into a contract when there's been a mistake or some misunderstanding about what the situation is, or anything from that through to outright fraud. So where it would be a fraud to just rely on the document, so there's no application there. We go into equity and the rule just doesn't apply. Similarly, and often we use collateral contracts in this way, similarly, if you're in a scenario where you've got an entire agreement, but something else was said that the parties are relying on, similarly, if we've got a privity issue where there's some kind of reliance or some kind of third party involvement, then it's actually a separate contract. So the parole evidence rule has no application to the collateral contract. A collateral contract is a contract that sits beside the main contract, which is in this case would be likely to be in writing. For an oral statement to be made during negotiations to form, an oral statement made during negotiations to form part of a written contract, the party making the oral statement must have intended that the statement was promissory and form part of the written contract. Intention is judged subjectively. Is this statement true or false? Oh, some people went in very quickly. True or false? Let's have a look. Great. Why is it false? Judged subjectively, exactly. The first, if this last sentence wasn't here, it would be a true statement. But it's judged objectively, not subjectively. So that's about reading the question carefully. So that's the end. L. Is L going to identify themselves? No? Yay! Little dancing. Well done.